No evil shall escape my sight. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Green Lantern John Stewart. John Stewart is a former U.S. Marine who uses his military training and discipline to protect Earth and the rest of Space Sector 2814 as a member of the intergalactic peacekeeping force known as the Green Lantern Corps. As Green Lantern, John wields a power ring, which creates a protective shield around him, allows him to fly, and generates hard light energy constructs in the form of anything he imagines. Fueled by willpower, Green Lantern's power ring is one of the most mightiest weapons in the universe. Before we get down to the review of Green Lantern Corps John Stewart, you know the first thing we're going to do. Bake muffins? No, we're not going to bake muffins. The first thing, though, although I'm tempted by your offer, the first thing we're going to do, no, in fact, we're going to measure off John Stewart's height. Now, understanding the fact that I've currently got him in sort of a V shape for his legs, that will reduce the height of the figure. If you wanted to have the figure at the most accurate height, you'll want to have these legs completely straight, but I generally would like to display my figure like this, so we'll go ahead and measure off to the very top of the figure's head, stopping it right there. If I'm reading this correctly, then John Stewart from the Green Lantern Corps is 7.1 inches in height. We can switch that over to centimeters, revealing that DC Multiverse John Stewart is 18.2 centimeters tall. And just to put things in proper perspective, I'm going to move over John Stewart. Why are you freeing up a space? Well, I'm going to bring in another Justice League member. Because this is technically like the closest somewhat comic Batman that we've gotten that doesn't have all the extra tie-in story reasons behind him. This is basically just Detective Batman, and certainly one of the oldest DC Multiverse figures that we've gotten from McFarlane Toys. I also wanted to bring him in for those reasons as well, give him a little bit of love. You can see that he's roughly about the same height as Bats, though Batman's ears are going to be a little bit taller, making him just a little bit taller. But proportionately, I feel like they could work well if you're displaying them or planning to display them together on your shelf. Now, being that John is part of the Corps, Green Lantern Corps that is, it's nice to see that McFarlane Toys would have thrown in some energy constructs to go with the figure. I feel like he would have been really absent without them, and we'll have a look at those shortly. In the meantime, though, we're going to move over to the samesies department because we're going to cover off the things that normally one would expect to find with the DC Multiverse line. Like, for example, the black display stand. The same stand that has come included with previous DC Multiverse figures. It has the same DC logo down below brandished, and it also does have the one singular peg that's wandering off to the side, like Shannon Doherty's eye. Boy, we haven't pulled that out from the trunk for a while. It's a nice, simple display stand, though I will say, if you're going to really have John Stewart as part of the Green Lantern Corps, you're generally going to, at least for me, probably would want to display him in flight. I think in a case like this, they probably should have included the flight stand instead of this simple stand. Now, you could really say the cost of producing this figure have met the quota with all the additional plastic for his accessories, and maybe that was one of the reasons why they decided to pass on a flight stand in favor of just a simple stand instead. I guess you really, by that logic, if you are collecting the DC Multiverse figures up to this point, you probably could easily just use a display stand that has come released with previous figures in the past. Anyways, though, he does come with a simple black display stand. He does also come with a trading card. I don't really want to look at this one. I don't know specifically the artist that's responsible for drawing this rendition of John Stewart, but I really like it. He has quite the contraption of a construct on his back torso there. It kind of looks like a jetpack, and that looks really super cool. Now, of course, down below, you've got Green Lantern John Stewart from the DC Rebirth line, and you flip it around to the back. Not only does it tell you the source material pulled, which in this case is Justice League number 6 from Comics 2018, but it also gives you his real name. It's not hiding anything. His name is John Stewart. His height in this case is 6'1", and his weight is a very lean 200 pounds. As for the read-up, you could certainly pause this video if you want, or you can rewind this video to the beginning of this review, where I read this at the very beginning intro. So there you go. It comes included with this. Let's just put that to the side. And let's now tackle. We'll move from here to over here, and we'll have a look at the energy constructs that come included with the figure. I have tweaked the figure from the way he was revealed and pulled from his plastic prison. One of the things that actually was on the figure that is not currently on him right now is the torso armor piece. I took that off first because I wanted to show you that the figure has the capabilities of being displayed without it. Let's have a look at that right now. Like I said, it's a torso piece that's constructed from the ring, and this basically just fits over top of his existing torso. They've used, in this case, a softer, more pliable plastic. You can also see by my hand waving behind it that it is a translucent plastic. It's very soft. It's kind of got the soft texturing of like a gummy bear. I wouldn't suggest you eating it, though. You can see it does have some nice detailing done to it. It's got the Green Lantern Corps logos there on the side, and a hole in the middle, an opening in the middle, that's going to fit around his existing logo. You may also see, peekaboo, that there's a hole on the back of him as well, or on the back of the torso piece. But to put this onto the figure, actually for this, I'm going to first pick up the figure, and I want to show you what it looks like without it. And for me personally, it's just more preference than anything else. I would likely display John Stewart in my own collection, I think, without it, because I like the more traditional look of the Green Lantern costume. Pretty simple of a design costume in the comics. Green shoulders generally will be on the costume, some type of green glove or green gauntlet in this case, and then green boots basically make up your traditional Green Lantern costume. But you see there's a lot more going on here than just the things I've described. I mean, there's a lot of interesting textures and different shapes that they've used to put together and piece together to give us a pretty elaborate looking Green Lantern suit. You'll see that there is a peg hole on the back that will play a role in a second. But if you want to put the torso piece over top of his body, or at least that armor piece over top of his body, what will of course involve you doing is grabbing the torso and removing his head from the ball peg. This becomes a lot easier, believe you me, the number of times that you've done this. I think I've probably popped his head off now 6 or 7 times. Glutton for punishment. But it becomes a lot easier. If you do have difficulty, though, freeing the head and then putting it back onto the peg, because it's going to have to eventually go back on there, you can either submerge the head in hot water, or you can also just heat the bottom area here with a hairdryer, just to soften up that plastic a little bit. But we're just going to put his decapitated head to the side for the time being. I'm going to grab the torso piece. And what you'll do is just fit that over top of his torso like this. Now, it's going to be quite loosey-goosey for the time being until you pop it down and it fits and snaps. Well, it doesn't even really snap. It's just more friction by shape. Once it gets past this little ledge, you'll see it stays in place. You can also reinforce it by adding then the backpack on the back hole. I'll talk more about that in a second. But I will say it does add a little bit of extra something to look at with your eyes. Personally, I would probably just be doing without it, but I do like the fact they included it. Let's go ahead and put his head back into place. It just seems so strange with his head rolling off to the side. Now, putting his head back into place, like I said, will involve a little bit more pressure, but you'll then hear a nice satisfying snap. And Green Lantern John Stewart's head is rightfully where it belongs, on the top of his neck. To come also included with the figure, he gets himself an Energy Construct backpack, which is made of the same translucent type of plastic, though it's a lot denser than the softer, more pliable plastic that fit over top of his torso. If you're familiar with G.I. Joes by now, you already know how these peg into place. Just a simple peg system. There's the peg on the back of the backpack. You flip the figure around, and then you'll just fit that into the hole. If it helps at all, you can also tug this just a little bit to make that taut, before then you go ahead and fit the backpack in place. Just pop it in place like that. It's generally pretty secure. Occasionally, though, while I have been moving the figure around, sometimes the backpack starts getting a little loosey-goosey again and starts flopping it around. But providing you put enough pressure into it, it seems to stay generally secure and doesn't move around too much. So he does come included with that. Then the last thing that he comes included with, for this may involve me having to actually put the figure down here for a second. It's going to be a little bit more back heavy, but if you get the legs and the feet properly footed, then you won't have any issues with the figure falling over. He comes included also with this Gatling gun. How cool is that? It seems to be constructed. Oh, I see what I did there. Constructed. It seems to be constructed by 2 halves that are put together, you can see there's the seam line right along the bottom area here. This then makes me think that this part of the Gatling gun, the main turret, is a separate piece. If that was the case, it would have been nice if this could have actually rotated, because even as a construct, you would still imagine that the Gatling gun part, the turret part, would still be able to rotate. And I can't seem to get that to move. So it's all pretty much just molded, sculpted plastic. It does have some nice detailing done to it, though. You can see the sculpt work on both sides of the Gatling gun sandwich. That sounds delicious. And there's also some nice molding along the top area there as well. One little added bit I would have nicely liked to see included with this figure is actual ammunition. Just a belt of ammunition that could have come from the Gatling gun and then attached to his backpack. Because really, when you have the two things with the figure, you almost feel like something should be joining these together. Almost like a counselor with a squabbling married couple. You almost feel like there's something that should be bridging the two together. And I mean, he doesn't have that. They're just two separate pieces like this. But to fit this into his hand, I find it actually helps to start with this handle first. And then from there, decide for yourself which hand is going to hold which side of it. It may also involve you, just putting this down for a second, prying the fingers away from the palm. Thumbs will be a bit of an issue when it comes to fitting this in his hand. But there, you're just going to go ahead and fit this into one side. And again, like I said, if it makes things a little easier to get that navigated into his palm, then by all means, just heat the hand first in hot water. Or again, you can also use the hairdryer trick. But you're just going to basically get this into his one hand. I would not have said it's super easy. Actually, it's a little bit more difficult simply just because you'll see that the fingers are so close to the palm that in fact I may actually just heat this up again. I've already heated it up one time already. Let's see if we can do it actually without using hot water. Just move it up, move it on up. There we go. That was a lot easier. And fit that in on one side. This is the more hassle of the two. And then once that's in place, just bring the arm around. And then grab the other hand, literally on the other hand, bend the elbow, bring the fingers again away from the palm. Heating may or may not be required on your part. And then you can just attach the hand to the other side like that. That looks a little on the awkward side. Kind of like that. I didn't securely attach the hand, but you get the idea. You see what I mean, though? I mean, it looks great. You've got the Gatling gun, and you have what I would imagine to be all the ammunition on the back of the backpack. But there's nothing really connecting the two together, and I feel it sort of ends up being a little absent. It feels like it should have something there, and simply it just doesn't. That's the only thing I probably would have included with this figure when it comes to his accessories. Wrapping up on the figure's accessories, now let's get a closer look at the figure itself. We'll start first with his head, and then we'll go from there all the way down to the rest of the figure's body. I will say, though, from a head sculpt standpoint, it's a pretty attractive looking John Stewart. It's a bit strange for me to say that, but I think it's a good sculpt, where I feel, if anything, the paint might have been the one thing that lets the head sculpt down a bit, especially when you see, especially with the light hitting it, see the sharp line that's cut into the head sculpt where the hair normally should have stopped. But you see that the paint has gone a little bit more on its merry little way and bled a bit onto his forehead. At least it's minor. From a distance, you barely even see it, other than just that little lip of paint that sticks down from there. So that's about the only place that could have been a little bit cleaner. I do like the fact that when it comes to his eyes, he has been given a Green Lantern green for his iris. And that's a nice little touch. There seems to also be a bit of reflection right at the top corner. That adds a little bit of life also to those eyes. Overall, I do think that the head sculpt is really good on the figure. Perhaps then talking a little more about the paint when we move the head sculpt just slightly to the side. It is a bit of a shame that the neck doesn't seem to be the same shade of brown as his face. It's close, but it's not quite there. I mean, thank goodness, really, there's a lot more drawing your attention away from the neck, like this top area of his torso. But yeah, it does seem like the neck isn't the same color as the rest of his face. As, of course, we move down from the head sculpt, we'll move to the rest of the body. I know we talked a little bit about that already at the beginning of this review, but some stellar-looking sculpt here. It does add a lot more things to look at on the costume, because if you think of it just as a traditional Green Lantern suit, this would all just be smooth. I mean, there really wouldn't be anything to kind of focus in on. Quite the contrary, though, when it comes to this particular Green Lantern suit, there's a lot of elaborate sculpts. Not only these kind of vented areas on the sides of his legs and the interior of his biceps, right around here, but there's a lot of stuff going on here in this abdomen area of the figure as well. And I know I already said this, the idea that this is something that can be removed. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it would have ruined the figure if this was something that was permanently attached to the figure. I mean, it still has the green, and you could imagine that that would be something that he'd still be able to construct with his ring. But I'm really super happy to see that this is something that can be removed from the figure, and there's actually a finished shoulder underneath this. Very nice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about his ring here. For this, of course, I'm going to try to get as closely in as possible. They have sculpted in the ring to actually feature the Green Lantern logo, and that is a really nice touch. I wish one thing that could have came included with this figure, I know we were just talking about the things that were kind of left off, like, for example, the little ammunition belt. But, you know, I really wished in a way that this figure could have also included a closed fist. Not on both necessarily, but at the very least on this hand right here. Because this is a Green Lantern holding ring hand, I almost feel like this hand should have also came as an available option with a closed fist. Just because I always picture the Green Lantern with a closed fist, of course, projecting his constructs. I wish that that could have been an option available for the figure. Other than that, though, I really like how this one turned out. If I could really be nitpicking the figure, I mean, if you look at the torso, I'll just mention this quickly. It's not a deal breaker at all when it comes to this figure's release. I mean, again, we talked a little bit about the neck not being the same color and tint as the face. That, you know, that's something you could overlook if you want to. The mid torso, if you look at the arms, you look at the top torso, and then you look at the lower legs, he's got this extra piece right here. And really the whole purpose of that is that you have the upper torso ball joint, but then you have this kind of, it's not quite skirting, but it's an extra piece of plastic that they've overlaid the body to. And you can see that there's the gap underneath that. This is just kind of a concealed way. They likely would have used it in this body for something else, and then just this extra torso piece was put over top of it. First of all, to hide the joints underneath it, but then to add this where they didn't have to change a mold. So I'm guessing that probably underneath this is something that we're going to see maybe with a future figure release. But unfortunately, though, the coloring doesn't quite match. It's a lot more of a jet black on the leg and as well for the torso. There is this little strip of very obvious off coloring here when it comes to the black. It's not super jarring, but I noticed it. Actually, you know what? When I took the figure out of the packaging, it was honestly the first thing I noticed. The fact that it wasn't quite gelling with the rest of the color on either sides of it. It's so very, very small. Just something I wanted to point out, though. We get a bit lower down, though, and the boots, like the rest of the costume, get some additional sculpting. I wouldn't necessarily say it's unnecessary. I mean, there's a lot of additional sculpting I probably would have just left off completely. But I mean, basing this from the comic design, this is not necessarily coming from Todd McFarlane's head. I mean, this sculpting I would think would be on the comic version of his costume. I just feel like there's some things on there. Maybe less is more. And I would have maybe just left off some of these pieces. I mean, the boots look good, but I feel like they're a little on the busy side. I would have probably pulled that back a bit. Tackling the articulation on the figure, the head rotates all the way around. It hinges up and down, not by much though, a lot more down than I would say up. That's about it. You can also move the head back and forth, and of course, yeah, you can rotate all the way around. For his shoulders, there is going to be, when you are moving the arms up, for example, possibly a potential limitation when it comes to his shoulders. Not so much from the figure end of things, but when you're looking at it from the top of the torso, because this is molded to this, and this is in a separate piece, if you are moving the arms like this out, I feel like you're adding then stress to the shoulder pieces, where it may start developing stress marks, or potentially start ripping away from the rest of the molded plastic around it. So I wouldn't necessarily display him, although it's kind of strange to have him displayed anyways with his arms extended out like this, but I probably wouldn't do it for long periods of time because I think that may warp the plastic. It may even potentially cause damage to those shoulder pieces. His arms still move forward and back, and because this is softer plastic, you can see how the shoulders go along for the ride. He does have, still underneath that, a cup joint, a socket joint, that allows then the arms to move a little bit further back than normal. And you can also bring the arms a little bit more forward than normal as well. He has a swivel at the bicep. He has a double hinge on the elbow. And he does also have the articulation on the hand, which rotates all the way around. Still wish, again, he could have come with a closed fist. Anyways. Upper torso is on the ball joint. And he does have a lower torso, what seems almost like a ball joint crunch, because he does have this hiding over top of it. You're sort of just guessing underneath. But there is definitely articulation happening on the lower half of the figure's body. And then he's just got this overlaid plastic over top of it. As for his legs split out, but that's to the full extent, it seems, of what he's capable of doing. I don't know what really is hanging this up. It could actually be the tops of his legs right here that are just rubbing up to the lower torso piece. And that, as a result of it, is to the extent of what you can actually get the legs going for. I mean, the legs still move forward and back fine and good. There's obviously the stopping point when he hits his behind. But at least you can get high kicks going for Green Lantern. John Stewart probably wouldn't want to do that anyways, but he does have the swivel at the top of the thigh. He does have the double hinge on the knee. And then when it comes to his boots aren't a separate piece. They're just simply a continuation of the tops of his calves. But he does have still articulation on the feet, pluralizing. They move back and forth. You can also ankle pivot them. And he does also have toe articulation. I did notice like the toes seem a little on the loose side. Maybe not as much on this side, but this toe right here is a bit on the super, super loose for me. It doesn't certainly impede the figure's stability when it comes to him standing. If he had really loose ankles, for example, then that might be a bigger problem. But overall, like a good-looking Green Lantern. Whatever the, I don't want to say nitpicks, whatever the few little things that I critiqued in this review as things that could have been changed on the figure aren't necessarily things that would be listing as under deal breaker. I don't think the things that I mentioned in this review are reasons to pass on this figure. They're just simply things I would have wanted to see included with the figure, like a closed fist for the ring hand, a Gatling gun, an actual Gatling gun turret that could rotate. That's, again, very super small. And an ammo belt that would have connected the Gatling gun to the backpack is also something I would have liked to have seen included with the figure. But, I mean, even without that, it's a really nice-looking Green Lantern. Specifically, it's a really nice Green Lantern John Stewart, which I'm looking forward to putting on display with the rest of my DC Multiverse figures. After taking a bath, no, not me, John Stewart, finally I was able to again free those hands up a bit so he could properly hold the Gatling gun in his hand. Again, this is a simple fix if you ever have figures when you take them out of the packaging that are stubborn, reluctant to hold on to accessories, or even just his head. You can either submerge it in hot water or you can use the hairdryer trick, which just basically involves you passing the hairdryer heat across that surface a couple of times just to soften up the plastic. But then once you've got that in place and you have that all fixed and resolved, then he easily holds the Gatling gun in his hand. I also want to draw everyone's attention to his backpack for a second, because I believe in this review I may have had the backpack facing the opposite way. I guess really you could have it going either way, but this way fits a little more conformed to the torso shape that he has. And I think it looks a little bit more appropriate like this. I still wish that, yeah, you could have had the ammo belt going from the backpack to the Gatling gun. This is something that G.I. Joes have been doing for years. He sadly doesn't have that, so it doesn't really look like the two are supposed to be connected to each other. I feel like the backpack would be feeding it the ammunition, but unfortunately with the figure, it just doesn't do it because he doesn't have that extra piece. The figure does look good on display, with or without that torso piece, and I do appreciate the fact that McFarlane's team gave you the option to go one with or without. Sometimes when we have seen Green Lantern figures released before, they already permanently put that thing on the figure where you just can't take it off. In this case, though, they gave you the available option once you pop the head off the ball peg after all, and then you can then either remove the torso piece, that armor piece, or you can just leave it on. I think ultimately I'm probably going to leave it off when it comes to displaying the figure. I'm still going to display him with the Gatling gun and still display him with the backpack corrected this time, but I'm probably going to just leave the energy constructed torso armor off altogether. It's just more my preference than anything else. Overall, it's a nice looking figure with a few little things, and like I said, I would have changed differently to it, but it's more so things I would have added to the figure. There's nothing I would have removed from the figure or really changed to what they did to this figure, overall, it's a nice, really nice looking Jon Stewart. What do you guys think of this figure of Jon Stewart? Let me know down below in the comments section. And also as well, if you guys are new to this channel, and certainly I hope enjoying all the content you're seeing and been loving as well that we're covering off the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse line, we're going to keep running with it. He continues as a company to keep churning out figures. As quickly as I think I've got the current wave, I go online and they've got another wave all circulating. But we're definitely going to be looking at some up and coming DC Multiverse figure reviews, so that to make sure that you're still part of that and that you're not going to be missing the train before it leaves the station. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and that you're turning on the bell notification. And that, yes, you're keeping your Green Lantern peepers peeled, which are green, because there's definitely going to be a lot more content coming your way and popping up soon to this channel. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.